In the hour of midnight he stood by the side of the well and wished that he could have had a drink of water. But there was ice in the air and cold in his bones, and the water would not thaw, only because he wished for it. He was a man to whom friendship was not a stranger, and someone who had a heart that gave happiness to others, and he had given much of his time upon this road to the selfless helping of others. Now, as he stood thirsty by the well, he knew that he had entered a rich land, for the markings on the road were made of silver. It troubled him to think that he knew of too many places that he had been on his travels that would have gouged out every last smell of silver from the mile markers. It made him feel relaxed to know that there was a place where money was not everything. But it didn't stop him wishing out loud for a drink. A light blinded him as soon as the words were from his lips, and he could scarcely believe it when he could see that there was a crack in the ice in the well water. He didn't question this miracle, and he sculled some of the icy water to his lips, and it brought a smile to his face as the wet sweetness lay on his dry tongue. Almost as quickly as the air had been lit, he was plunged into darkness again, and it brought a fear to his heart. He didn't really want to move away from the well, as the water was as sweet as the finest wine he had ever drunk, but the light flashed again, and he realized that in the distance there was a lighthouse. He knew that where there was a lighthouse there would be a lighthouse keeper, and a bed and a shelter from the ravages of winter. The ravages of winter which had her icy claws into his flesh and bones. He was reluctant to leave the sweet water behind, and he put it into his mind to put some of this fine liquid into a flask in the pack and the sack at his back, before he set off to the comfort of the tower. As the relentless flash of the lighthouse lit the silver mileposts, he felt reassured that soon he would be out of the cold, and he would be a welcome stranger by the side of a glowing fire. It spurred him on to make the journey a short one, and in barely 100 heartbeats his fist rattled at the studded door with a hopeful ring that could be heard all over the wind-swept cliff tops. There was a shuffling, an echoed click and a tip of a cane at the other side of the door, and an old man with a bent back and an oil lamp in his hand beckoned him inside. No words were spoken until he had his hat and cloak removed and hung upon a rack by the closing door, and he moved to shake the old man's hand.
"There's no need for you to help me or thank me."
The words were harsh on the young man's ear. He only wanted to show his appreciation for the generosity of his host. It was almost as if the old gentleman could read his thoughts.
"I am sorry. I do not get many guests in my home. I have forgotten my manners. Perhaps I can offer you a drink. A tea, or a wine, perhaps."
The young man felt heartened by this change in the old man's manners. "Thank you, but no, I have had a drink of the excellent water that you have at the well not 1 mile away from here." The old man stopped in his tracks and turned with a sly smile upon his broad cracked lips.
"The well? The well, you say? Tell me, my fine friend, did you find the water pleasant?"
There was a depth to his question that the young traveller chose to ignore. His voice, filled with enthusiasm and desire, mirrored from the cold stone walls of the lighthouse. "Oh, yes, indeed. It is the finest that I have ever drunk. It is the sweetest that... It is sweeter than honey on the tongue, and I mean to get some more when I have rested in this place." If the old man had been attentive before, then he was fairly quivering with excitement now.
More, you say? More. That means that you have some of that fine water with you. Tell me now, if you have any of the well water with you."
He had drawn himself to the young man's side and was clawing at his sleeve.
"Do you have any of the water? Do you? Tell me. Tell me now that you have."
Although he had a stick in his hand and his back was bent, he was dancing a merry jig in the hallway of the tower. The young man was finding the old man's attention a little too much, and stretched past him, and took the pack down from the peg. "Well, yes, I have some of the well water, and I have it in this bag." Before he had the chance to remove the flask, the old man had snatched at his bag and had the flask opened and the water pouring over his lips and face as if he had never drunk in the whole of his life. He could only look on in revulsion as the old man sucked and licked at every last single morsel of the water. It was as the leather bottle fell to the floor that the young man could see that the old man's back was straighter and taller. The old man's voice had become deeper and less cracked with age, and it was as if the old man was taller than he himself. He was, in fact, having to look up to see the old man. He reached out to the old man, and he could see that the skin on his own hands was now lined with age and loose upon his bones.
"What is it? What have you done to me, old man?"
His voice had become as old as the cliffs that surrounded this desolate spot.
"Oh, my dear young, I am sorry. My dear old man, it is not what I have done to you, but what you have done to yourself, and—"
He paused as he grew taller as the weight of age was passed from him to the traveller.
"And now, and how, you have helped me."
His hair was no longer grey as he reached towards his guest.
"Let me give you this."
The golden cane with its ruby top was pushed into the wrinkled hands of the traveller.
"You will need this, as I needed it to walk with as I was foolish enough to give the water from the well to the lighthouse keeper before me."
He laughed a cold, overdue laugh.
"I was foolish enough to help her, and now you will have to wait until another poor, hapless fool comes this way with some of the water of the well. You may well wait for years, decades."
He laughed again.
"Let us hope that it doesn't become centuries. Let me tell you, you will not hesitate for a second when it comes your turn to leave this place. Be ready."
He moved swiftly to the door.
"Be ready, for you will have a knowledge of thirst by the time another fool comes to the door with water in a flask, just as you came to me. I will thank you for my release from this prison of a lighthouse and rest well upon the stick. It will be your only companion."
Before the traveller had a chance to call him for mercy, the door was closed and he was alone. Alone to work in the lighthouse and hope that the day would come when he would taste the well water again. She was intrigued by the great glass tower. Everyone was intrigued by the great glass tower at the top of the sweet green grassy hill. They would pound with their fists on the clear walls of the building and shout and yell and scream for it to open. They could not knock on a door or a window, for there were no windows, doors or locks to open. This is what had made her move from the top of the world to the bottom of the world, to the sides of the world, and every land to find a way to open this great puzzle of a glass tower. It was in plain sight of everyone to see that it was half filled with water. She was the kind of girl who would only see things that were half full and never half empty. The crowds at its base had ideas of gold and money hidden beneath the rippling mass of water, and it did ripple when they were beating on the walls of the tower. The sun would shine through the glass, and the water would cause shimmering rainbows to be cast onto the only green grass that there was in this dry land. It was almost laughable to hear those grown men and women pleading for the tower to open. Their cries were like those of children wanting an extra treat or a toy when they know that they have enough already in their lives. If they could have listened to themselves, they would have heard only the selfish wishes of something for themselves. Although the land was dry, the cattle and sheep were hardy and needed only a few mouthfuls of the grass from the hill to sustain themselves, and all of the people lived as well as could be expected on the few days of rain that fell into the sluggish rivers at the base of the hill. The girl had been travelling for many months, and now she was tired as she watched the townsfolk yelling and kicking at the walls of the tower. She'd seen many things, she'd been to many lands, and now she had a smile on her lips that grew weary as she listened to them all being greedy and selfish. She had to push one farmer out of the way who had grown so frustrated with his useless attempts to get the tower to give up its secret that he had taken to kicking the sides of the glass wall. He was indignant and angry, but secretly glad that he did not have to continue with his ranting. Her slow, graceful approach to the walls of the tower caused a hush to descend on the town. She raised her hand as if she were going to knock on the walls, but, as if in a dance, she turned on the spot and placed her back to the tower and smiled at the people that she had known since she was a child. Some had their mouths open and in a dumb gawk. Others nudged their companions and indicated with a touch to their foreheads that they considered that she was a fool. Nevertheless, no one spoke as they wanted to see what she was going to do. What she was going to do that they had not already done themselves. Her smile was knowing as she looked at them one by one, and her voice was true and calm. "There is nothing inside of this tower that I want for myself." The nudging, whispering, and the gawping continued. She repeated what she had said, much to the amusement of the giggling cynics in the crowd. "There is nothing in this tower that I want for myself." Nothing happened. Nothing happened within the tower, and the voices of the crowd could be heard clearly as they started to mock her efforts. But the girl had an authority in her voice that made many stand and stare and wait to see if anything would happen where so many had failed. The crowd was starting to move away, but they stopped when a slow, grinding, gurgling noise came from the tower. Some cried out in fear, others cried with joy, as the clear bricks by the side of the girl started to move and cool, fresh, clean, cold water started to cascade about the girl and down the mountain and into the once dry rivers. Some wanted to pull her away from the torrent of water that fell all around her, but she raised her hand to stop any attempt to pull her out of the raging water. Her voice could be heard above the rush of the water. "There is nothing in this tower that I want for myself." And with this, she stepped away from the tower and stood among the crowd. Some congratulated her on making this valley one where rivers could flow freely. Some grabbed her hand and fell to their knees in front of her as if she were a saint. Others clasped her to them, knowing that they would never need for water for their fields or animals. The girl just smiled, knowing that her work was done and that she had to move away from all of these people that she had known and had helped. Her work was done, but she had to move away from that place, for her vow had brought water to her homeland, but only for others. There was nothing in the tower that she wanted for herself. The water would flow from a half-full tower forever for everyone else, but not for her. As she walked away, she left not a drop of water as a trail on the ground, and if those who had taken the time to look or think or sense, they would have seen that the water had not lain on her clothes when they clasped her to them. They would have sensed that her hand was dry when they shook it. They would have thought and realized that she had done all of this for them.